Um, Owen is a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, involving lecturing on narrative medicine. And as a poet, his publications include the collections Marriage Map, Sometimes Full of Daylight, and Field Light, as well as multiple other chapbooks and pamphlets. Owen won the Hippocrates Prize in 2016, and the same year he won the Jean Peddick Chapbook Prize. And his other major prizes include the Rumi Prize and the Guernsey International Poetry Prize, as was alluded to earlier for those that joined the call early. Owen also has multiple other prizes and commendations. And excitingly, his new pamphlet, Knock Knock, has been published very recently, I understand. And I believe Owen's going to share some of his recent work with us, as well as some older work. So thank you very much, Owen, for being our first speaker this evening. And I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Okay, Ramsey, thank you so much. So I'm going to be reading from this book, Knock Knock, and I'm particularly happy to be reading it to the Hippocrates audience because it's really a medical book, sort of. It's an extended persona poem of a character who's becoming progressively senile as the book progresses, but I hope you'll find with a lot of love and humor. It's a pamphlet, and I think I want to say that of course we all get started with a pamphlet, but at times pamphlet can be a very powerful short book, and that's how I intended this. Knock Knock. I'm sure you're all hearing the famous knock knock jokes. The first knock knock comes actually from William Shakespeare's Macbeth, where he says, "Knock knock, who's there? In the other devil's name, faith, here's an equivocator. Oh, come in, equivocator." And that from that I took some inspiration. And so I will read a good selection of these poems, and then conclude, as we've been asked to feature a poem or two by a poet who's been dead at least, 70 years, to avoid any copyright. So I have two short poems by Emily Dickinson on aging, which I will share with you. And the set begins with Prelude, How I Started to Use a Cane. A day of almost rain, I took my umbrella to be prepared. It had an oak-curved handle that fitted my palm. I hadn't noticed at first the tap of the wooden end on the street just ahead of my right foot. The motion, a natural swing forward just ahead of my right foot, sweet, easy. I was talking on the phone, walking steadier, noticed the tap, and after the tap step, a light knock. A knock like someone's at the door come to visit, like company's always arriving, and I feel this step in my hand and hear it keeping a nice beat. If my feet are sock swaddled, they get muffled and vague and make a kind of shuffle step, shuffle glide, instead of the steady tap. The tap steps sure contact with concrete. Some days I set out, I'm halfway downtown and I forget. All the names and numbers are in the phone, I know, but when the name goes blank, the phone directory is no use at all. The tap steps, the only sure thing, even as my daughter's name, my very own firstborn's name, slips my mind, and I almost slip from the sudden blank shock of it, comes the tap. The tap step, the tap step keeps my feet perfectly in place. My mind can be anywhere at all. I haven't imagined I've lost my scarf. Then a coat, my phone, the book I am reading. The ivory cat isn't seen, and I imagine him lost several hours ago. Later, he appears on my pillow. In my albums, friends and family don't have extra lives. I make sure to write their names. I'm trying to remember the title of the book. I look under the cushions and a stack of journals. I've got no use for news about news, no headlines about the scarf or the coat. Where'd they go? Lost and found is not a planned destination. I ask my doctor how one can remember not remembering. He's one of the good ones, holds my x-ray up to the window. I can see through that. There's a tree bough growing across my lungs, in my knees, a bird nest, my shoulder, a garden of perennials. From the MRI, I see a cloud inside my skull. He's asking about my aches. I live with them. What does he do with his? My daughter glares. She comes with that nervous cough of hers that always makes me forget what I want to ask. I should have made a list. What about that cumulus? What about sleep? He insists. I insist. What about that cloud? Am I a cloud? An I cloud? Blessed heavens. They ask me to step outside the office. I'm listening at the door. She's telling the doctor things like I'm a misbehaving kid and he's the bow-tied principal. Then he shows me the ventricle, traces a gaping hole. I won't look. In it, a mix of all the words I can't remember tumbling around. The letters link arm in arm, something I'll need to know. Next, next, next. Next is detention in an old age home. What if I refuse? What if I get in my car and drive to Florida myself or Alaska? He calls it a fugue state. I tell him, I am a doctor too. Were, my friend, were, your daughter will what? What needs to be done? I am not, I am. I had a white coat with the name stitched in red script letters above the pocket. In this next poem, you'll hear a lot of, all the initials that doctors like to throw around. The only one you may not be familiar with, AMA, is the American Medical Association. Card carrying member of the AMA, it's always in my wallet. What the letters mean, I don't matter. It doesn't matter. Smart and well-educated doctors can have whole conversations in quick letter codes. Check the CBC, the UA, the EEG, the ECG, CPK. They love those lipids. They love ratios. The BUN/creatinine, LDL/HDL, and mostly they love to insist, echo him. Doctor's orders, echo him. Marvelous to hear human echoes and decipher everything hearts say. I take off my shirt and undershirt, but not my pants. The technician focuses the machine over the knock deep in my right ventricle, and they seance around my chest and close their eyes to listen to the knocking. I know the moment they can all hear a first love's echo, and their faces become beatific. Get hold of yourself. What you remember is true. I tell myself to remember my daughter said we bought the semi-detached cottage as is. I'm as is, caveat emptor, buyer beware. It's decorated in tropical colors and rattan furniture that creaks louder than my knees. When I was 8, uncle and aunt and cousins took me along. We drove 3 days to Florida, and this is true. We pulled into a pseudo-Mexicana south of the border joint, a welcoming elephant chained to a palm. Aunt said, "Close the window." Elephant knocked, so I opened mine. He ran his trunk in across our noses and beat his trunk with newspaper. And I kept thinking that elephant could pick up the whole car or roll us right off the road or stomp us flat. We went into the restaurant, and since we were south of the border, probably Carolina, a sign above the door read, "White only." And my uncle said, "Just ignore it. And one day it will change. And good thing we live up north." It seems just last month we were singing, "We shall overcome one day." And that's how fast time is and isn't when change is needed more than ever. I don't know where to live when change is more than ever. Knock? Who's there? You. You who? You don't even know? Know what? You're already in. In what? In what, he asks. Is he still a doctor? He is, I suppose. Then he should know. Know what? Be what? In what? Until what? Until. Before my daughter leaves, she always promises she'll be back in a few days or a few months, and she pocket pins my name tag on my shirt and says, "Always wear it, don't take it off." She says, "Don't worry," and tells me she feels bad since there's no piano here, but my fingers don't play it anymore. She says, "Just hum the fugue song." But I'm only one voice. We need at least 3 others. She says, "Say hi each time the attendant comes by and start with him." But I know she's even more worried I'll forget my name, lose the tag, so I don't take it off, and I'm good. And even when I send the shirt to the washers, they don't take it off, and every day I sit in the sun, a red bench under a blousy date palm. A very friendly lady keeps coming by, and one day she sits on the bench right next to me, and then I realize it's not a coconut palm, but a date palm, and boy, am I a dummy. And she asks my name. What my name is, I point to the tag, but my name's already a blue streak, and I say, "That's who." She points to hers, laughs so much There isn't even a smear left on hers, and we become good friends. This next poem references a Talmudic story, and you'll get the gist of it. Lesson number 13 from the care home. Oh, I should also say this was in the Hippocrates Book of the Brain, the anthology, some years back. So thank you, Michael, for having selected this one. Lesson number 13 from the care home. Standing on one foot, an interesting proposition. It's a balance exercise my PT has me do. And a king once asked a rabbi, must have been Hillel, to explain the whole Torah standing on one foot. He said, love your neighbor. He was on one foot, and the rest, commentary. Did he mean actual love on one foot? Maybe with PT help, my friendly lady friend neighbor, just a wall between us, always cries when they try to give her a pill. Curses, nurses, nurses, curses. But she loves the rabbi story, loves it, says it would make a wonderful bar mitzvah speech. So I tell it again. Then we try it. We pretend we're flamingos, hobbling along, one leg each, two good legs between us. Pink is also an interesting proposition. So is flamingo. Knock? Again? Knock, knock again? Again who? Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo who? Boo-hoo you. Nah. Knock, knock. Who's there? Like it or what? Like it or lump it? Nah. Knock, knock. Stop equivocating. You know this is getting old. And so are you. Knock, 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 knock. Anyone home? Please finish the conversation. Welcome to the house of uninvited guests. Want to try to get their attention, get a word in? I'm awake most of the time when they leave me bored to death. Try to sleep. Come evening, all at once they're here. How many bells did you hear? They're crowding the kitchen around the little pot of tea. Kettle keeps whistling. Open honey jar, a buzzing hive of conversation. They never finish what they're saying. This house gives me a headache. Again, the cursing cousin, who let her in? And mother instructing the mayor on how he's supposed to remember father. I should have sat her down long ago, gotten the whole story. How long could it take? 8 hours. What's 8 or 3 or 11? Nurse, daughter, more numbers, green lines jumping the overhead screen. Whoever gets the whole story beginning to end? Give them all a lie detector test. Oh, yes, and it's so good to see you. Please come in. And this is a childhood recollection of a time early on when in our public schools we had to begin every day with the Pledge of Allegiance, an anthem, Bible reading, and the Lord's Prayer. And this was kind of strange to me. Hello, Mrs. Wilson. Mrs. Wilson isn't nice and isn't mean. I've never met anyone like that. Her toes scrunch out a hole at the end of her shoes. She stands by the blackboard all day except lunch. She makes us recite the Pledge of Allegiance, Country 'tis of thee, recite the Lord's Prayer. Sometimes twice she forgets and says never enough prayer, and chides, don't they say it in the Jewish church? Also recite Psalm 23. She'll leaf through the Bible asking which psalm the class would like to hear. It's always green pastures. Listen to announcement. Who's boy of the day, girl of the day, know thems of the day. Guess whose birthday it is? May 23rd, 1958. Clean out our desks. Flip tops hide a lot of mess. Cleanliness next to godliness. But she smells musty. Line up to sharpen pencils. Return to desks, fold hands, now in unison in good citizens' voices. We're ready, Mrs. Wilson. I'm going to skip ahead and conclude with what to do with pocket change. Just a few things. Zaidi is a Yiddish word for grandfather, references a ceremony called Pidyon Haben, which is ransoming the firstborn child. And anything else to know here? No. Okay. What to do with pocket change is in another book, not mine. If there's a coin for the ferryman, drachmas or zlotys, not 2 bits. If and when I'm just a body, Zaidi told my father, who told me, the soul returns to blessed be his name with an indelible name tag that never washes out. When I'm just a body, 1 coin for the committee who washes me, the other I've carried from the tray of the Pidyon Haben. The Kohen needed 5 silver pieces. Not sure we had it. Was I redeemed? I am still here, still counting. Doctor, doctor, your patient is calling. If he's dead, he'll want his eyes closed. Or maybe he'll want one left open. The secret, roving one, the sacrilegious one. Only Moses could look into God's face. Holy moly! Afterwards he glowed in divine sunburn. If and when, a coin on just 1 eye. Knock, knock. I don't want to miss a thing. There are some postscripts, but I think that's a nice place to end.
We can unmute for some applause if people are able to.
So thank you. Thank you very much. Just a few stories. When my wife first heard me read this, she angrily took me aside and said, "What aren't you telling me? What doctors have you seen?" And then I had the experience of another friend I hadn't seen since before COVID, and he had had a hip replacement that didn't go so well, so he was walking around on a cane. And when he first read this set, in fact, he's a neurosurgeon, poet, wonderful poet. He said, Owen, I'm so sorry you're getting around with the cane. I assure you this is imagination, and part of the inspiration was, look, something's going to happen to us all, and yeah, I'm sometimes not remembering words quite as well, but this is really a kind of work of imagination and trying it on for size. The only reassurance I could give my wife was, I said, honey, look, if I'm really there, I don't think I'm going to be able to write this. So, uh, um, let me move on to two short poems by Emily Dickinson. And there's something about a Dickinson lyric that, and I've chosen two that have something to do with aging. The more you dwell in them, the more enigmatic in some ways they become. So this is, her verses are simply numbered. This is number 1619. Not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door. Or has it feathers like a bird, or billows like a shore? Now, let me read it again. Not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door. Or has it feathers like a bird, or billows like a shore? Now, where is this poem located? I mean, if this is dawn, it's at night. And are these doors of dreams that she's opening? Are these doors of her house that she's looking for the dawn? Or is she dealing with dawn as a metaphor, not knowing if the dawn will come, light, inspiration, seeing things freshly? But I think contained in this also is a sense not knowing if the dawn will come seems to be contained. And that's a pretty long line, not knowing when the dawn will come. And then a very short line with a lot of white space after it. I open every door. And then it feels like something's left out because it rushes now, or has it feathers like a bird, or billows like a shore? She is so excited and so animated by what is coming to her simply by opening these doors. And I don't know what it necessarily is. It would seem when the dawn will come. So is the it, or has it feathers like a bird? If this is some kind of imaginative dawn, or billows like a shore, or has something else been left out that she's imagined? And it's almost like in that white space, she takes you way into the bright imagination of her mind. And I found this really quite inspirational, that what do we do not knowing if the dawn is about to come? So there's another poem that it turns out is part of a letter that she wrote to Francis and Louise Norcross, but you could read it like a poem, and I want to read this one too. Affection is like bread, unnoticed till we starve, and then we dream of it and sing of it and paint it when every urchin in the street has more than he can eat. We turn not older with years, but newer every day. And that last line just slays me. we turn not older with years, but newer every day. And I think, with that as inspiration, one looks forward to what's happening. Okay. Ramsey, do we want to take questions now or hold them till the end? I'm good either way.
Yeah, no, I think that let's do questions now. So if anyone wants to unmute and ask questions or raise their hand, then please do so. I'll unspotlight you, Owen, so that we can see everyone.
Good. I can't
Owen,
full screen. Yes. Let me see.
Owen,
Yes.
where is the aging in the first Emily Dickinson that you read? The shore and door.
I think not knowing when the dawn will come, I suppose it could be someone terrified of the night, but I took this really as I hear in this not knowing if a new day will come. And yes, you don't have to be aging, but I mean, that's the sort of thing that the longer you live, the more you begin to wonder, is the new day going to come? So perhaps I'm reading into it, but that's how I saw this as a poem about
Okay,
aging.
okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. That was a fantastic series. What I wondered is that I just wrote down some of the lines. Lost and found is not a destination. I don't know
A
where
planned
to live.
destination. Lost and found is not a planned
Planned
destination.
destination.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know where to live when change is more than ever. What a fantastic thing. Do you, because of your clinical work, do you get some of the language, some of the ideas about that gradual disintegration and the language from patients, from discussion? Or is it stuff that you think has come to you?
Well, I can't say that I can trace anything to a specific patient, but one accumulates experience with patients and people over the years. And my mother-in-law just celebrated her 99th birthday. And, some days she's quite lucid and other days a little bit more forgetful. So I'm a little bit more up close to that. And then it's sort of taking these moments of, gosh, what is that word I'm looking for now? And imagining, what if that were more the case rather than just an occasional.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's taking those moments to dwell on it. But I can't say there's a specific patient per se, but at the same time, one accumulates.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was wondering, because I'm retired, but I've been a clinician for 30, 40 years. So yes, it is. I just wondered if it's that, because sometimes I think stuff that comes to me is an accumulation of what a mishmash of patients have said over a period of time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
occasionally there will be one thing that stands out. But I was just interested to know how that process would work, because it sounds so authentic. It's great.
I've scared a lot of people with this, I have to tell you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Owen,
Yes.
I'm interested in the paradox of writing from the inside of this gradual onset of what can become dementia as somebody who is absolutely compos mentis and lucid. And there's a big paradox there, isn't there? Because it means surely that you can never really represent that
Yeah.
experience because you're busy compositionally organizing and creating and thinking it through as you write.
Yes, there is a certain appropriation. You know, I had the experience once I've never been in a serious car accident, a fender bender once, but I've imagined it, and I wrote a sequence of poems, being in a car accident, what happened afterwards, and I was working with a teacher who was quite well-known poet, and we worked for a while. I put it away. I didn't give it another thought, and about a year later, someone we knew in common had been in quite a serious accident, and he looked at me, he said, "Well, but you know all about that, don't you?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he said, "Well, that set you wrote." So I think we're entitled to use our imagination, but it is a paradox. The one thing I would say that I had just recently learned, a friend had told me of a set of self-portraits of an artist who knew he was in a process of dementia and gradually lost the ability to represent a face, and he actually recorded it, you know, in this series of portraits. And that, of course, would be, let's say, a more genuine or certainly not an appropriating approach. But yes, there's clearly a paradox, and perhaps like the car accident, the only justification is the fear is genuine of this happening. So capitalizing and letting that fear lead me into imagined states, whether it's a car accident or dementia, I can claim that as just, let us say.
Can I ask, so what should one fear more, do you think? Should one fear a loss of memory of facts or a loss of creativity? And I wonder, in your experience with patients with dementia, is creativity a victim? Because nobody talks about that. You don't need creativity to function, you know, in day-to-day life normally.
That's a wonderful question. I've never really thought about that. I mean, my thoughts go, so I haven't treated an artistically creative person who has experienced this. I relate that story about the artist because I just learned of that. But then I think about the creativity of everyday life. And I'm thinking about one patient, and the thing that she was bemoaning, she has two granddaughters, and she would think of the most imaginative adventures to take her two granddaughters on. And she realized at a certain point she couldn't come up with anything to do with her granddaughters, except maybe repeat things like go to a special tea or maybe go to the zoo. But she would always in the past have created a kind of animal hunt or something. And that was, she was really grieving that loss as a conscious loss. And that, I would say, is part of the creativity of everyday life, not necessarily special creativity. For me, I think the thing I'm highlighting is what exists of the person with the loss of identity as represented, by the name tag, and finally a representation of God as the entity with an indelible name tag, right? And what's left of the person. When these two characters become good friends without names, that felt like a very special moment that one can still find potential. This is all in my imagination, but that one could still find moments of solace.
Thank you, Owen. So in the interest of time, so Chris has had his hand up for some time, so we'll make Chris the last question before we move on to Judith. So please go ahead, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Owen. I really enjoyed that. I think the poems were insightful, empathic, humorous, and I imagine it's difficult to avoid despair when you're dealing with dementia, but you do that. That must have been very difficult. And were the poems difficult to write, or did you enjoy writing them? And did you write them to give people hope?
I would say I was, as I put myself into a state of really trying these shoes on, what would, sort of moments that could still create a spark, moments that to potentially find hope. So I think that was pushing the writing, and moments of humor and love and interest and fascination, that
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again, Owen, and thanks everyone for the questions and feedback. So if people could please unmute their microphones so we could show our appreciation for Owen with a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks so many of my friends from stateside who have joined. And okay.
Great, thank you. So if I spotlight Judith. So our next wonderful speaker is Judith Wozniak. I should say Dr. Judith Wozniak, who worked as a doctor and also has an MA in writing poetry from Newcastle University and the Poetry School. She won the Hippocrates Prize in 2020. In fact, she actually won the first prize and joined the health professionals in that year. Her debut pamphlet, Patient Watching, was published in 2022, and she was selected in the Hedgehog Press Prize White Label First Collection competition. She's been commended in the Poets Meet Politics competition, and in 2021 she won the second prize in the Grey Hen Press competition. The poems have appeared in many publications, including Research Poetry, Ink, Sweat and Tears, and The Poetry Shed. And Judith's new pamphlet, Case Notes, has, I believe, either very recently been published or is very soon to be published in the Hedgehog Poetry Press. I think, similarly to Owen, Judith's also going to share some of her new work and some older work with us. So thank you very much, Judith. Please take it away.
Thank you. I enjoyed your poems, Owen. Great. I'm going to do it the other way around and start off with the extra poet. And I chose Edna St. Vincent Millay, who was known as Vincent to her friends. And interesting lady who lived in poverty with her single parent, with her mother and two sisters. And she was petite with pre-Raphaelite auburn hair. She was bisexual, a political feminist, and a morphine addict, but she was the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1922. She was a poet who really liked sonnets, but I've picked a poem because it's really miserable here in England at the moment, pouring with rain and cold, just to give you a bit of warmth, and it's called Cassis, Memory of Cassis. Do you recall how we sat by the smokily burning, twisted, odorous trunk of the olive tree in the inn on the cliff, and skinned the ripe green figs, and heard the white sirocco driving in the sea. The thunder and the smother there were like a ship's prow, the lighthouse breasted the wave. How wanly through the wild spray, under our peering eyes, the eye of the light looked out, dishevelled but without dismay. Do you recall the sweet Alison over the ledges, crawling the tall heather and the mushrooms under the pines, and the deep white dust of the broad road leading outward to a world forgotten between the dusty almonds and the dusty vines? I hope that's made you feel a bit warmer. I'm going to read some poems from my forthcoming pamphlet, hopefully that coming sometime very soon, called Case Notes. And it's got two main themes. One of the themes is my experiences of illness from the point of view of the doctor. And the other strand is really imagined interactions between doctors who looked after poets and artists in the past. I've mixed them up a bit so it's not all about me. So the first poem, my first house job was in Tor Bay in Devon, and I soon learnt that the best thing to do was to do a night round before trying to go to bed some ungodly hour to check on my charges. There are some patients you never forget, like Albert. He pulls his covers to his chin, pegs them with rusted fingers, his oxygen mask pushed up like the cap he wore in the Hussars. The consultant, a voice smooth as molasses, peers over half moons to persuade Albert to take his tablets. He cups his ear, scrunches his face. In the night hush of the ward, light spills from the nurse's station. Albert beckons me, says not to worry. He hopes he'll be home soon. I like that he always calls me maid, despite the new stiff white coat carving crescents in my calves. He worries it's past my bedtime. While he sleeps, I slide his mask down to ease the heaves of his breath. I find his stash of tablets smuggled in the shrug of his shoulders. In the morning, his bed is stripped down to the shiny plastic cover, his scant belongings parcelled up for no one to collect. So getting through your pre-registration house years, it was in those days, was just the first hurdle. This is first to do no harm after Hippocrates. He staggers out across our path, drapes his arms around me, just a lad. At first we laugh, we think he's drunk. A peony-shaped stain spreads crimson over my best navy dress with silk ties. We're on our way up to celebrate, making it through the first year. He starts to claw the air, his face pale as candle wax. I'm kneeling in his spilled blood. Splashed flecks stiffen my face. I feel it seep sticky between my thighs, press my ear against his chest, listen for a heartbeat. People gather. We fend them off. Don't worry, we're all doctors. We don't believe it ourselves. Long for the sound of the siren, the rotating pulse of blue light, the safety of the hospital, the crash team running, the clatter of drip stands. Hours spent learning lists, practicing procedures, and all we can do is to wait. So after some hospital jobs, I joined a practice in Plymouth and discovered it's quite hard to step into the shoes of a much-loved doctor when they're on leave. A routine house call. I hear her reedy voice, the tap of a stick. Wait while she struggles to unbolt the door. Not her usual doctor. I smile my way in like a salesman. Her cardigan rides up over a spine curved like an upturned hull. A pink scalp peeps through a fuss of curls. She eases herself slowly into her chair, sinks into a puff of dust and talc. I turn her hands over in mine. The fan of bones collapse against each other. Her skin crinkles like the fine film on rice pudding flecked with nutmeg. I ask to listen to her chest. She hesitates, trembles her fingers over pearl buttons, peels away the edge of a matted camisole, seeped with the sweet musk of decay. She shows me only the ulcerated edge, concealed under a makeshift dressing. I have never seen a tumour so advanced, and try not to let her read my face. I asked gently why she'd kept this hidden for so long. Her doctor visited every month. She didn't want to upset such a lovely man. She grasps my wrist, begs me not to tell him. I soon discovered that it helped to go and collect patients in the waiting room because it just gave a little bit more time to see what was going on. Undercover. He brings War and Peace to remind me to keep to time. I see him more often now since his wife's last illness. Sat at the back of the waiting room, he fades into the walls. His beige wind cheater zipped to the top. I call his name. Watch how he struggles to heft his stiff frame from the chair. He is trapped inside his rigid body, like an insect entombed in amber. I offer my arm. He shuffles small steps, asking me if he's undercover, and discover he was once a commando in the jungle. We both forget what he came for, and my surgery runs late again. You never quite know what you're going to find on a home visit. Changeling. She has barricaded herself upstairs with her baby. I talk my way into a room backlit by a street lamp. Her words trip over each other. She found a sign, a feather hidden under his cot. She was told he was born with a caul. He should have been safe. It's his smell. She's certain this baby is not hers. He's lying so still, his face a mask, bone white, translucent eyelids traced with inky capillaries. Then he stirs, holds up a chubby hand, fingers splay as he dreams, slowly curl back, folding his thumb in a dimpled fist. He startles as I lift him, hold his warm, milky sleepiness. Her gaze fixed on the open window, a shudder of cold rattles the latch. Nets caught on a breeze, sail into the room. She sees an angel. So the next poem, a few poems, are written from the imagined point of view of doctors caring for artists and poets. So Dr. Potsy was a renowned gynecologist, popular with his patients, not only for his good looks, but also his excellent outcomes, largely because of his interest in anesthesia and antisepsis. He was also one of the actress Sarah Bernhardt's many lovers. They remained friends, and she always called him Dr. God. Actually, at the moment, his portrait's on display at Tate Britain, John Singer Sargent. Sarah Bernhardt's right leg, after Dr. Potsy. I first saw her emerge from the Odeon, a froth of silk and feathers, unfazed by the mizzle jewelling her hair, spun sugar glistening in a loop of gaslight, her skin moon pale, a glimpse of shapely ankle in a satin slipper. She persuaded me to pose for my portrait in blood-red robes. A thick tassel hanging from a cord belt amused her. The fall should have destroyed her. I could never again watch Tosca leaping from the parapet. Her letters implored me to intervene. My beloved Dr. God, I beg you to cut off my leg a little above the knee. She was wheeled into the operating theatre in a white silk peignoir, veiled in rose crepe de chine, whistling the Marseillaise. My courageous lady of the camellias. They say it was her finest performance. Amazingly, she went on to tour with her one leg after all that. I'm going to take you from Paris to Craig Lockhart Hospital in Edinburgh, where Dr. Arthur Brock looked after the war poet Wilfred Owen. Owen was admitted there in June 1917 with shell shock, or neurasthenia, as you're allowed to call it if you're an officer, much safer. Dr. Brock was really ahead of his time, using talking therapies and encouraging patients to work in the grounds. It was here that Owen met fellow patient Siegfried Sassoon. Time to Heal, in memory of Dr. Arthur Brock. Some nights their words seep through my dreams, night terrors that drip with slaughter, men caught on snarls of wire, noiseless dead in the thick darkness. These men have become like the fragments of their minds. I coax them to share what they've witnessed in daylight, to help them banish phantoms that stalk their sleep. Owen often walks with Sassoon down the sloping lawns. He tells me he's the dark star in Sassoon's orbit. I note a growing tenderness between them. I think of our first meeting, the loose uniform, pallid skin grey as smoked tallow wax, the spring-loaded startle at the rattle of a window, the tremor clattering his teacup. Even his stammer settles when he reads out his poems, as if it were holding back horrors he could only express on the page. Sassoon thinks he shows great promise. I wake early thinking of my patients. Mist creeps over the meadow, wraps slate rooftops. The Firth of Forth shines a ribbon of light, as if nothing has changed. Still in France, in Arles. So Vincent van Gogh was admitted to hospital in Arles after he cut off his ear. The doctor who cared for him, Dr. Ray, and the local pastor recommended treatment in the less harsh regime in the asylum of Saint-Remy under the care of Dr. Perron, who allowed him to paint. Watching Vincent after Dr. Perron. On the first morning, he set up his easel in the walled garden. My other patients watch him work in silence or shuffle past. He calls them his companions in misfortune. I begin to notice my surroundings through an artist's eye, how the wheat ripples, sulphur yellow, copper and bronze, violet blue olive trees, sometimes silver, sometimes bluer. The first emerald spring shoots splashed crimson with poppies. He talks of the beautiful melancholy of the ravine, finds sprigs of rosemary and thyme in the scorched grass for his bedroom. He knows when the mistral ribbons through limestone rock, a terrible terror and horror seize him, prevent him thinking. Here in Provence, we know it, call it to the idiot wind. He finds consolation at night looking out beyond the bars of his window to see Jupiter shimmer for him in a cobalt sky. He tells me the sight of stars always makes him dream. He painted branches of our almond tree, a scatter of petals against an azure canvas to hang above his nephew's crib. For his namesake, he sung a lullaby in colour. Vincent tells me how he longs for autumn, chill October, the wistfulness of the year end. And my last one about artists is Frida Kahlo, Mexico. Frida Kahlo had lifelong chronic pain. She had polio as a child, and then she had a life-changing accident where a bus she was travelling in crashed and she was impaled on a metal handrail. And she had numerous operations on her spine. And she dedicated a self-portrait to Dr. Leo Eloisa. Caring for Frida, Dr. Eloisa, my doctor and my best friend. She has to sit to work now. Splashes of oil paint catch in the folds of fabric in her lap where the easel nestles. Her speckled funerary beads streaked with brush strokes. Each time our lives touch, I see a different face of Frida. To others, she seems to have mastery over her suffering. Swathed in shawl, she conceals her crushed body. In billowing, ground-skimming skirts, voluminous blouses embellished with embroidery, lapis lazuli, hummingbirds, sunset orange marigolds. Her gift to me, a self-portrait. Her hair braided with coral bougainvillea, dark brows, meet like rook's wings. A thorn necklace pierces her. And finally, 2 more poems back to me. So most worrying visits were after a long evening surgery. We're already tired and hungry, and you have to be so careful you don't miss something. Second opinion. By the time I arrive, she's already in her night clothes, feet steadied in oversized slippers with a fur ruff. The heating is set to tropical. My glasses steam up. I settle on the sofa. This could take some time. I struggle to extract clues, check red flags, hidden agendas, examine vital signs. I try charming her, be like my mother. She's delighted. I'm getting weary now. One last try. Is anything else worrying you? Tomorrow's the wedding, her granddaughter's. She has been warned not to let the family down. She disappears into her bedroom, returns wearing a huge hat like the Quangle Wangles. It's feathered, beribboned, quivering. I peer underneath, wipe a trickle of tears from her chin. It needs a minor op. With her informed consent, I tease out 2 pheasant feathers, a cluster of plastic cherries, then use my sterile scissors to trim the organza bow. She beams at her reflection. It's amazing, I say. And finally, I'll finish with a poem, Peggy and George. Before I can put my bag down, a cup of tea is pressed into my hands, biscuits in a puddled saucer. I've come back to check on George, the tug and heave of his breath, eased since yesterday. Peggy hovers, making her curious clicking noises with her mouth. Her loose dentures oscillate to their own rhythm. She peers up, squeezes her face. I'm not wearing the rim or lipstick she gave me. She worries I'm too pale. They have shrunk over time to fit into their sheltered home, squashed together with their trinkets. She has hardly left the house for years, once to visit George in hospital and for their golden wedding buffet at the Red Lion. Stooped together like brackets, Peggy fidgeting with a clasp of her best necklace. Guests of honour, the district nurse, unrecognisable, loosened from her tight bun, and me with my sunset orange lips. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Judith. If people are able to unmute for a round of applause for Judith's readings. You want to raise your hand?
I want
Please,
to
Owen.
jump in and say what beautiful work illuminating the work that we do as doctors. And I had so many wonderful moments, but I think one of my favorite moments was where you captured the tentative mother who then looks at her baby and sees an angel. And that was just quite special, that moment there.
I take the spotlight off you, Judith. I'll be able to see other people. I think Claire Goro has her hand up.
Hi, that was wonderful. And Owen, yours was also wonderful. I'm beginning to get a little PTSD about practice again. Because it just lines up with memories and so well put that I just feel it. And I'm so glad I've got dinner ahead of me and not work. Thank you.
So thank you, Judith. I mean, so many of the poems struck me so much and brought familiar things to mind, and particularly the first poem for me, the night round, really brought back such a familiar scene of those times, but really brought out the humanity of the situation with the patient and brought it to life. So I thought that was wonderful. Thank you for that. I think Nicola has a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Judith. They were wonderful, and like I guess quite a few people in the audience. I was also a GP for many years, and it's just like I did get some sort of anxiety, but I think you chose such intimate, specific cases to describe them so beautifully. And particularly the one towards the end about the hat, when you go on a visit and you just, as you say, you just have no idea what you're going to find, but to find somebody who just couldn't tell you and then eventually manages to tell you, goes out and comes back with a hat. You know, you just couldn't write a job description, could you? It's infinite. You don't know what you're going to have to do, but they are a wonderful tribute to your patients and to the work in general. Thank you.
Great. I think Jane McLaughlin has a hand up.
Hello, yes. Yes, I'm unmuted, aren't I? What I really love both lots of poems, but particularly about Judith's, is that it's not easy to write poems about work, and many of these were about work and the sort of practicality and the everydayness of it and the detail, and putting that so it's really poetic. And I think that's really interesting, and you know, a great poetic achievement, really, because I say it's so hard to do that.
May I say something to Jane? And yes, to second what you said, that Judith really captured that. You know, one of the things I teach at Columbia is poetry to second semester medical students. They're required to take a 6-week intensive. And in some follow-up, one of my students wrote, he's not writing poetry anymore, and the point is not necessarily to make poets of them. He says, but you know, I do see so many moments of poetry as I make my rounds. And I thought, you know, that's what poetry can do, like to focus the eye on those moments of poetry. And if we go through the day seeing 2 or 3 or 4, our patients really, really benefit from those moments. So again, Judith, thank you for bringing those moments back to life for all of us.
I'll just share a few things from the chat. So Diana says, such moving portraits, Judith. And Mary has said she loved all of the readings. Great variety, between the doctors, the artists, and the family. Roger says, such vivid portraits, excellent. And iPhone brackets 2, I'm not sure who that is, said wonderful readings, very so inspirational, and thank you to both readers. And Jane says, very natural descriptions of patient stories. Judith, thank you. I shall try to recall mine in more detail. And then several more saying thank you and wonderful poems and splendid reading.
I think Chris has his hand up.
Chris, thank you, Michael.
Hmm.
Oh, Chris, you're still muted.
Yeah, thanks very much, Judith. I really enjoyed the reading. I thought it was excellent. Did you write the poems at the time of meeting the patient, or you know, have these come much later, when you've retired and had time to think about these things a bit more?
Yeah, not until I retired. I didn't really start writing until I retired. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think patients don't realise how well you remember them.
Yeah.
You know, I remember singing with our community choir, and a patient coming up to me, and I was amazed that I remembered, after a husband. I don't think they realise that they're as important to us as we are to them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, thank you very much.
Just since everyone's being silent for a moment, let me just pop in a book recommendation to all of you. Peter Goldsworthy, the very eminent Australian poet and novelist and librettist, has just published his book, The Cancer Finishing School, a title that his wife suggested when he was about 3 years into what's now become 6 years since his first diagnosis with multiple myeloma. And he's gone through the usual works, the stem cell treatment, and so on. And he has spent his day job, all of his life has been as a GP. But he's written everything that one could wish to write, and is considered one of the half dozen preeminent Australian writers. He was our keynote speaker at the very first ever Hippocrates Symposium. And one of the things that struck me reading this new book of his, The Cancer Finishing School, wonderful, grim and humorous title, typically poised, as all of his utterances are, was how unfailingly he has been oriented towards his patients, to the extent that he always kept a notebook with him. And the moment somebody had said something interesting or had some very strange thing that happened or whatever, the moment anything like that came up, in it went into the notebook. This man is every millimeter a writer. And he's done that all of his working life, and it shows in a lot of his work. But either way, I think the same principle applies with him as applies with you, Judith, which is that the old Wordsworthian idea of being recollected in tranquility is the important principle. You go back to it in memory afterwards and work on it then, don't you?
Yes, I wish I'd made some notes. I was reading William Carlos Williams, who he wrote notes on everything, didn't he? On bits of scraps of paper and all through his working day.
Yes.
Prescription pads, everything. I wish I'd known that.
Yes. The only problem with his poems is that often it shows, doesn't it?
Oh.
Listen, I'm old enough to tell it how I think it.
Well, I must say, on the other side of the pond.
Oh, go on. Don't let's have this. Come on.
Well, you won't like this, Michael, but
Listen, I'm a card-carrying fan. I've often taught Williams, and I think he's wonderful and so on. But I have to say things like that because we all know there are bits of his work which are deadly dull.
Yes, okay, I agree. I agree.
As with Wordsworth.
But what I wanted to say about the making notes, I think that helped him actually evolve his style, because his notes were in a more natural kind of voice, and actually how he evolves to put those lines down on the page also reflects a little bit more cadences of speech. And so I think that note-taking actually helped him evolve as a poet. Now, the dissenting opinion, Michael.
I don't really dissent from that. It implicitly overvalues his understanding of the line. And I think that Williams had a fundamentally puerile understanding of the line. It was entirely unschooled and undeveloped. It makes me rather cross at times. On the other hand, since you brought Emily Dickinson to tonight's event, let's just remember that when she has that open space that you referred to after the word dawn, that's because she has a tetrameter followed by a trimeter. Yeah, it's a 4-3-4-3. Those are her feet in the iambic lines. And you're bound to have an open space opening up after the trimeter if you've had a tetrameter before it. Simple. You know, so that is a matter of the line. Emily Dickinson knows that. She knows how to use lines. Yeah. With William Carlos Williams, it's often an accident how the lines evolve. It's just accidental. She's doing it because she knows her art.
Can't dispute that.
I've opened up a can of worms, I think.
Oh boy.
Well, so if everyone's able to unmute their microphone, just for a round of applause for Judith, to show our appreciation for her reading.
Can I just say a word about Edna St. Vincent Millay?
Please.
I love that choice, Judith. We just had a foot of snow, and to think of the coast of Maine, with, you know, which I don't know if you've been there.
No.
But it would be lovely in the summer or spring. And I love her first poem, which is, I forget the title of it, but it just describes the whole bay around Camden. And thank you. I love her stuff.
You know, I want to say that I so appreciate the conversation we're having. I think a reading is always the first part of a conversation. So I'm glad we've been able to have a bit more of a conversation. And if you'd like to be in touch with me, I put my website up in the group chat, and you could send. You could always send an email to me through that website, and I'm happy to hear more thoughts. And I welcome correspondence.
Okay, great. Well, I think that that brings us to a close for this evening. So thank you so much again to Owen and Judith for the readings this evening.
And a big hand to Ramsey and Eleanor for keeping the initiative going.
Oh, and Luzma, who's on the call, and Andy, who can't join us, and Gloria and Alba, and everyone that's contributing.
And Michael and Wendy, let me
Indeed.
say hello to both of them.
Thank you.
That was grand, everybody.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Owen.